This is the hurry up and wait part. This is the courting. So we sent an offer to Hunt, Runyon, Eluemunor, the 3 offensive linemen, Devin Singletary, Tyrod, we already sent one, and then we're working on the Birds thing. So I think we'll be able to get something done there.
Hi, I'm Peter Schrager. This is the Hard Knocks podcast, and I am feeling like poker is the theme of the week. Cue that Beyonce country music. I'm telling you, I like that Texas Hold'em song. I think it works well in this episode, and let's get our cards on the table. We're going to have Giants GM Joe Schoen on as our guest, who I think is candid and loose in our conversation, and I can't imagine anyone better to have after the episode we just watched. Episodes 1 and 2 had some great buildup and character development. Episode 3 felt like action. Like, this is the big Saquon episode. We have known all along how this situation ends up. Saquon leaves and takes his talents to the Eagles, but this is the episode where we find out how it all went down. Here's General Manager Joe Schoen with Ed Berry, Saquon Barkley's agent, early on, setting the parameters.
Okay, all right, well, I'll give you a call back. This may be above me on Saquon, but if I call you back and it's 3 for 12.5 APY and 25 guaranteed, there you go. We'll bring him down today. We'll fly you up. We'll do a press conference. All right, appreciate you, bud. All right, there.
But then we hear a conversation between Schoen and President and CEO John Mara, and maybe Ed Berry was muted during that entire call for a reason, because it wasn't as cut and dry as that. Apparently, Saquon does have other offers, but we don't know exactly from whom or for how much money. The poker game motif in this episode is great, and it carries on throughout, and we see how the science and the models of free agency budgeting and planning really work. We learn that the offensive line talent is being lined up one by one, and we even see a guy named Robert Hunt, as a prominent piece of the plan. Hunt's a free agent. He actually ends up not with the Giants, and I find that really interesting. You see, I follow the league very closely, and though I don't get the name drops in the episode that Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport get, I consider myself very plugged in. And I didn't realize there was a legitimate chance, in the Giants' heads at least, that they could get Robert Hunt and Jon Runyan in the same free agency spending spree. The fact that that's all in there, and the fact that Hunt leaves the Dolphins to sign somewhere else and not the Giants, that's what makes this Hard Knocks series different from all the other offseason content that we usually get. See, we're actually seeing the plans and we're seeing the chase, and yet they don't always work out. It's the same with Tyrod Taylor here. It's pretty cool that we have Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, who were with Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo and, of course, in New York last year, openly say that they'd like to have Tyrod Taylor back in the building as their backup quarterback. But he ends up signing elsewhere, the Jets of all places. We, as viewers, never get to see this. Usually, a team will promote and put out a shiny video on Instagram saying, the Giants signed Drew Lock, and for all we know, Drew Lock was the number 1 guy, and that's that, and Tyrod Taylor wasn't being chased after. Well, Hard Knocks takes us inside and into places and plans and conversations we never thought would see the light of day. Truth of the matter is, Tyrod Taylor was plan number 1. That doesn't work out, so Drew Lock is now the backup quarterback. So as the episode continues, Joe Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll are moving and grooving. They're listening to their Beyonce, and they agree that Motor Singletary at $6 million is a pretty nice alternative to Saquon Barkley at $12.5 or $13 million. And that's when owner, president, CEO John Mara steps into the office.
What's the latest? Just on the Saquon thing.
I just got a text that Chicago's driving the price up and Philly's out. I don't know if that's true or not. I'll make a couple calls. I don't even know if that's gonna happen, but
I'm gonna have a tough time sleeping if Saquon goes to Philadelphia. I'll tell you that. As I've told you, just being honest. I've been around enough players. He's the most popular player we have by far.
Oh, baby. It's in a very candid conversation. I find it interesting for a lot of reasons. Obviously, that's included, and Mara's saying that and is out there saying, especially if he goes to Philly. But I also find it interesting because in many buildings, if the owner, the president, the CEO says that, that would be that. Mara obviously trusts Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. That's my takeaway here. But Schoen and Dable also have the confidence to stick by their decision. Trust me, this would not be the case in 32 NFL buildings. I'm not going to name names. You can make your guesses. But in quite a few different cities, if an owner wants to keep a player and the player is really popular and the difference is a few $1,000,000, trust me, that player is likely staying with that team with an extension. We go from Saquon to the good stuff with the Jon Runyan deal. So Jon Runyan Jr. gets an offer from the Jets that is very handsome. And Drew, who is referred to, that's the agent Drew Rosenhaus, says that the Giants have to offer more because of the Rodgers-Hackett connection. That's like kind of like a little throwaway line. Let me explain that. So Aaron Rodgers is obviously the quarterback of the New York Jets. We got to know him on Hard Knocks last summer. Nathaniel Hackett is the offensive coordinator, one of the top offensive linemen. While those two were together in Green Bay was Jon Runyan Jr. So Jon Runyan Jr. is a free agent. He knows the offensive coordinator very well. He knows the quarterback very well. It almost seems like the Giants have to pay a premium to convince him to come to New York to play for their team as opposed to come to New York to play for the Jets because of the comfort and the familiarity. That's how this works. Sometimes free agency, you say, well, wait, this team offered more money. Why'd they have to offer more money? Well, because there was a greater comfort zone in another city, and you're going to have to pay them more to do that. Last year, the Jets did sign a bunch of Aaron Rodgers' old buddies, Alan Lazard, a wide receiver, Randall Cobb, another wide receiver, Billy Taylor, an offensive lineman. They put that thing together because they all were comfortable with each other, and Nathaniel Hackett was the offensive coordinator. As we see here, the Jets obviously tried taking a swing to keep that line of reasoning going, bringing in Jon Runyan Jr. The Giants, it seems like, had to up their offer a little bit more to get him to sign with Big Blue instead of Gang Green. Back to Saquon. Ed Berry gets another phone call, and he says that Saquon got an offer north of $13 million. So Joe Schoen knows that he's not going to be a Giant anymore, but he also knows that his owner will not be thrilled if Saquon is actually playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. So in that conversation with Berry, he says, can you tell me if the offer is within the division? It matters. Fans may assume that it matters, but we find out now it really does. Seeing Saquon Barkley in an Eagles jersey is a far more bitter pill to swallow than seeing Saquon Barkley in, say, a Bears jersey. John Mara finds out and sort of shrugs his shoulders, and that's that. Saquon Barkley was the second overall pick in the NFL draft. He's one of the great Giants of his generation. He was the face of the franchise for the last 5 years. And the chapter ends with him posing for photos in an Eagles jersey at their press conference. And now that it's done and the Giants have moved on, and obviously Saquon is moving on, it's interesting to look back because Saquon was such a superstar in New York. I mean, every kid in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut market who rooted for the Giants for the last 5 years had a Saquon jersey. His rookie season, he was outstanding. He was on the NFL 100 commercial, which was basically every famous player that was still living being honored by the NFL. Saquon was in that thing just a few years ago. And you feel it when you hear John Mara, you feel the voice of the fans because Saquon really gave it his all. He had some unfortunate injuries, but beyond that, when he was on the field, there was no more electric player with the Giants. It was only 5 years. He's going to have a career with another team, maybe multiple other teams, but it is a chapter of Giants football and one that was not marked by a ton of success. Yes, they won a playoff game a couple of years back, but it wasn't like they went to Super Bowls with Saquon. But I think for a generation of kids and for a generation of Giants fans, Saquon Barkley was that dude. But as you learn in the NFL, it's truly next man up. And before you can even blink an eye, former Bills and Texas running backs Devin Singletary, nicknamed the Motor, is signed by the New York Giants, and that is that. Thank you for your service, Saquon. We're moving on. Godspeed. The Brian Burns trade is the next focus of the episode, and putting my insider hat on, I think this is also really interesting to see from this vantage point. Spider-Man, as he's nicknamed, has been a very good player on what I'll say candidly has been a not-so-great team the past few years. The Panthers are not a perennial playoff squad, and last season had the worst record in all of football. The Rams made a big push for him at the trade deadline a year ago, and Carolina said no thank you. But there's new leadership in Carolina, and Dan Morgan, the Panthers' new first-year general manager, has a different view of things and maybe a different relationship with Giants GM Joe Schoen than the previous GM of the Panthers had with whoever else was looking to make trades for him. This is Dan Morgan's first NFL trade. And as Liev Schreiber tells us, it's a complicated one because the Giants have to work out a deal with Burns on one end and then also have to work out a deal with the Carolina Panthers when it comes to trade compensation. The Giants offer $87 million to Brian Burns. Great. The Giants also need to make that trade with the Panthers. And the back and forth goes on and on and on. Here's Brandon Brown, the assistant general manager of the New York Giants, talking with Joe Schoen.
Hey, Dante's waiting on the owner?
Mm-hmm.
He just needs to just tell you, like, yes or no.
Yeah. All right, here's Demo. See what happens. Let it ring. Daniel Thomas Morgan. What's up, buddy?
Oh my God. What do we do? What are we doing, Dan? Why do we need to add on a seventh, Dan? Like, come on. You and I are gonna be doing this a long time, hopefully, and like we gotta have allies. I don't want to throw in a seventh. Like, I need players too, Dan.
After what feels like a lot of back and forth, the deal is done. But how good is this? At the end of hours and hours and hours of discussion, Dan Morgan, who's one of Joe Schoen's best friends, wants another 7th-round pick. Schoen pushes back and he's trying to work him. And Shane's like, no. And they get the deal done. But the fact that Morgan just needed that last little piece and then Schoen kind of finally put his foot down. I love Brian Dable, the coach of the Giants. He then calls Schoen and congratulates him. And then Joe gets the call from his daughter, Harper, saying that her dad had a good day of work. But the best stuff in the episode is maybe Joe Schoen in his house, where we find out that Sydney, his oldest daughter, is best friends with Dan Morgan's daughter. This is the kind of personal touch we are used to at Hard Knocks, but we don't necessarily see from the front office. Usually it's a player, a 6th-round draft pick, a coach who's trying to make it with a new team. This is the GM, and he's one of just 32 in the world that does what he does. And here he is at home talking about football in a relaxed setting, talking about the relationships, and he's got his kids talking about their friends and the kids from school talking about football themselves. You forget this, where you look at Joe Schoen as GM of the Giants and budgets and decisions and Saquon. He goes home to a family and he talks to that family, and there's so much more that goes into this than just the football. I always think of a story, and it's from a former NFL head coach. And he tells me a story of, it was a couple years into his reign and things weren't going great with a team, and everyone in that market was saying he should be fired. And his son walked into his office and he tells me the story with with tears in his eyes and says, "Dad, I hope, the stories aren't true." And his son's in 8th grade and he's like, "I really like living here. And I really like the friends I've made. And if you can do everything you can not to get fired, that'd be awesome." And like my heart breaks even telling that story. And this coach tells that story. It's like, it's the part of football that no one wants to hear. The fans don't really care to hear. But when everyone's talking about coaches being on the hot seat and getting fired and GMs getting fired and who's next, like there's an 8th grade kid at home who really just made some good friends over the last few years. And because dad just got fired, he's got to figure that all out in going into high school. I don't know. Something to keep in mind. And when you see these kids playing Uno at the end of the episode, it's nice to sometimes see a face to these families that we always talk about in X's and O's and with dollars and cents. So Joe Schoen's 2024 free agency saga is over, but the draft is right around the corner. We get a little sneak peek there at the end. So I said, let's get him on the podcast. With no further ado, the general manager of the New York Giants and one of the focal points of this season of Hard Knocks with the New York Giants, Mr. Joe Schoen. Joe, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Always a pleasure of mine.
Yeah, we love chatting usually. And in this case, it's about a television show that you're one of the stars of. Is that still weird for you? Or are you like getting into the comfort zone where you're walking in a supermarket and someone says, "Hey, I know you." "Oh, from what?" "From HBO."
No, it is. It is. And again, this is the first time a show like this has been done, an all-season Hard Knocks. So we didn't really necessarily know where it was going to go, how it was going to turn out. And, that's definitely something that's come along now that 2 episodes are out, whether it's going through an airport or something like that.
It's funny because I've been watching these Hard Knocks series for years. So have you. And then you get to this and it's like, for some reason, it feels like every conversation or every scene of this series with the Giants has been dissected by like the Giants media and by the Giants fans. That's something I didn't anticipate. It's almost like Zapruder footage. Like, okay, well, look at Joe Schoen's body language when they're talking to Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
Have you been able to catch any of that? Like the fans' reaction to the actual scenes themselves?
Honestly, Peter, so many people have opinions on different things, and depending who you ask when they watch the show, So I've kind of stayed away from what everybody's been saying. And I've used our staff members. What's the narrative this week? What are they talking about? And some of that's a product of the news cycle. Like there's not a lot going on. So I think the fan engagement is very invested in the show along with the media and everybody else. You're talking about 4th of July weekend and then, the second week of July. Like there's not a lot going on. There's a build up to football. So, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the reaction from the people I work with, the family members and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun.
The third episode's a pivotal one in the series. We have the Saquon decision and we have it all right there for us to digest. Watching it back, that deal with you and Mr. Mara talking about Saquon and his legacy here as a Giant, and really at the end of the day, letting that caged bird fly and go elsewhere.
Yeah, it was difficult. It always is. And we're just where our roster is and the different needs that we had and how we were going to allocate our funds that we had to make a difficult decision. And, we wish Saquon nothing but the best. And, the initial, episode 1, when we're all in the office and Chris Rossetti's saying, should we trade? Do we not? We didn't even know what the cap was at the time. So if we're going to invest $12 million in a franchise tag and try to franchise, it just didn't make a lot of sense with the other holes that we had to fill. So the context of that conversation versus, episode 2, I'm sitting in my office like, oh my God, the salary cap's $250. Like we have more money. That changed, our planning. And, that episode, my staff was on vacation. We'd take the week off before we go to the combine, recharge. So by the time I got to the combine and had, the press conference, we hadn't even reconvened as a staff to say, hey, we have more money now. Let's recalibrate. Let's see what we can do. What are our options? So, yeah, but back to the Saquon thing, it's always difficult. We went through a million different scenarios, and I'm happy for him. I'm going to root for him. Other than 2 times a year when we have to play him individually.
Careful rooting for Saquon.
Yeah, he did a lot for the franchise. He was nothing but a pro through the whole situation, and we had really candid conversations. And again, I think ultimately, he did what's best for him and his family.
You could tell that Mr. Mara's heart, there's something tugging at him just because of what Saquon's meant. To see that all back, those conversations now on film, does it feel like you're watching 2 other people having a conversation, or do you relive that entire convo back and forth?
Yeah, Peter, that's real. Like there's a couple of times I get myself caught up back. Like I remember how I felt at that moment. And again, these decisions aren't easy, and you're trying to put this puzzle together, and it is stressful, and you're always testing your process and what are the positive outcomes, what could go wrong, what it'll look like if we do this, what it'll look like if we don't do it. Watching some of these, it takes me back to, I remember those days and the stress I was feeling, and again, not knowing exactly what the future is going to hold or how it's going to turn out.
Well, it is kind of cool. You have this Saquon stuff going on, but simultaneously, you guys are working on DeAndre Swift and Motor Singletary, and it ends up being Motor Singletary in the end, Devin Singletary. Your thought process at the time, and now as we fast forward several months, like how are we feeling about how that has turned out so far?
I was in Buffalo when we drafted Devin Singletary and Motor, and great kid. He's been productive. He's been durable. Had a really good season last year for Houston. So he was a guy we knew that there was a surplus of running backs on the market, and we didn't really know where the market was going to go because there wasn't those additional funds. We were operating as if, hey, the cap is going to probably be in the 240 to 245 range, not knowing he was going to go up to 255. So where the running back market was in the past, we didn't think there would be this influx of cash in that position. So he was a guy we had on our radar. The last 4 years, he's been the leading rusher on whatever team he's been on. And the last 4 years, those teams have won a playoff game. So he's good enough to win with. He's healthy, he's durable, and he's good enough to win playoff games. So he's a guy at the price point, the type of kid he is, the work ethic, again, the durability, the availability that we're excited to get.
Do you love the scouting part more? Is it equal, or is it that stuff where it's like, all right, this is what we have to play with. We're going to negotiate contracts. Do you like the business side of it as much as the scouting stuff? Because we learned in the first 2 episodes, you grew up in this league, you came through the scouting ranks, but this is almost, you need a PhD in business to consider some of these negotiations.
Yeah. And we're always trying to, again, what percentage did this position go up this year? What's it looking like? And you have all these conversations and you're trying to figure out the value, place the proper value. And again, $15 million more, per team that we didn't know was going to be out there. So some of our numbers were low early on. And then as you're setting it up, you're trying to figure out, okay, what's our walkaway point? Because you get caught up in the moment. And we stretched on a couple of players and it was okay. It wasn't significant. We didn't stretch by 5 million. Maybe it was $1 million here, $1 million there. But that's fun. The strategy part is fun. I've been at places where you've been used by somebody and they were never going to come back to you anyways, or they were never going to give you a shot and they went somewhere else. Again, that's out of your control. You don't really know that that's going on. So I think the agent relationships, you'll see a lot of the agents we work with, very professional, really good relationship with them. Ed Triggs, Kevin Abrams, they do a great job with the negotiations. In our pro department, Chris Rossetti and his staff, they come up with a value where from the pro scouting staff, they think this is what the value is going to be. And then Kevin and Ed and Charles Tisch do a good job coming up with from a football administrative standpoint where they think that'll be. So I enjoy it all. It's all fun. Obviously the draft, you turn the card in, they're yours. They have no choice. And roughly what the salary is going to be. But no, it's all fun. I love it. I'm glad the way the off season turned out. It turned out well. And we're able to get some of our targeted players.
Yeah, it was cool because you get Singletary, obviously. And then you also mentioned in those first 2 episodes how important the offensive line is and to give Daniel a chance to stand up. When you look back at the offensive line, which is not the sexiest thing for the fans at home, like this isn't going to necessarily win the day, but the offensive line getting beefed up both in free agency and the draft, that was important for the Giants this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a lot of injuries last year and that hurt us, and, not just our starters, but depth of guys as well. So, that was a concerted effort and, getting Jermaine Eluemunor and John Runyon. So we had guys that were targeted. We were able to get them. And, again, I think that's going to help everybody. Not, it's going to help Devin Singletary. It's going to help Daniel Jones. It's going to help Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, all those guys get the ball as well. Because if the quarterback can't stand on his feet, it's hard to get those guys the ball and spread it around.
You're still working the Burns trade in this episode. And at one point, you and Dan Morgan are talking. He's like, dude, like it's a 7th round pick. Why are you trying to squeeze me out of a 7th round pick? We need players too. It's true though. This is candid. Like you want to win every negotiation. And at some point it's, what are we fighting over here?
Yeah. And Dan did a great job. I mean, I that was his first trade and he was wearing me down. And he did a great job. What you don't see on there is that Kevin Abrams was up until 3 a.m. the night before getting the deal done. Cause it was, hey, if you can get the parameters of a deal done, then I think we're close enough with draft compensation. We should be able to get something done. Well, that's the night before.
So you've got, just to interrupt for everyone at home, like Burns needs a new contract too. So it's not like it wasn't just a trade. It's all right, trade, but also what are we paying this guy?
Exactly. So Sunday night, Dan and I talked. He's like, hey, if you can get a deal done with Burns and Todd France's agent and Athletes First, then I think we're close enough. So that night, Kevin Abrams and I are communicating up till 1 a.m. And I can't keep my eyes open anymore. And I think Kevin and Todd agreed to something around 3 a.m. And then we just had some small details to tighten up early that morning. And Dan did a great job. He wore me down and we went back and forth. And, on the point chart, if you add it up, I mean, it was almost a 1st round pick with the high 2nd round pick he got plus the other stuff. So on the point chart, he almost got a 1st round pick. But Dan did a great job. It was good dealing with him. And yeah, I got to do what's best for my team and he's got to do what's best for him. So when I'm pleading with him at the end, I know exactly what he's doing. He's trying to do what's best for the Panthers. And we had met someone in the middle there with the compensation.
And it was probably the move of the offseason for the Giants. The other big move is the draft. Now, in this episode, it's mostly free agency, but from what I'm told, next episode, there is a great scene of you sitting down the owners and laying out the draft plan. How stressful is that when you're sitting down like, okay, we've done the work. You've trusted me here, but I'm going to lay out what our intentions are and how it will go.
Yeah, we're always trying to gather information the best we can. And, obviously that starts at the combine and some of the all-star games, the spring, and then some conversations in April. So you're trying to figure out who's going to be there and devise a plan if somebody were to trade up or willing to trade back. So a lot of phone conversations with other general managers, other teams. The phone rings when you're on the clock. Be prepared if somebody calls and offers something that you can't refuse, or if there's a player there that, hey, we're not gonna mess around. We're gonna take this guy and turn the card in. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy that conversation with ownership and Dayball's in there in my office right before the draft, and we map out what we think is gonna happen, and here's what we're gonna do if this happens. If if B scenario happens, then here's our plan there. At 6, it's a little bit easier to map that out. If it was a year ago and we're at 25. You really have no idea what's going to happen by the time you pick. But yeah, that's a cool scene that they have in there with John Mara, Steve Tisch, and Dayball and I.
How often are you looking at mock drafts in those days leading up, or is that just garbage that people like me in the media play with?
No, we look at, because guys like you are accurate, and you have contacts around the league. Obviously have an analytics department, and they will evaluate your mock drafts over the years and who's the most accurate, and are you the most accurate in the top 5, top 10, 15? And We do. We go through that stuff and look, and over time you see, maybe Peter Schrager's tied in and he does well on these mock drafts. So we're paying a little bit more attention to Peter Schrager than maybe somebody else. So, and that's legit. We do look at that.
Name names. No, that's good. The other question I have, based on how this has been going, and you look back on it, it's like Daniel Jones has, we've got this great confidence in, but then Drew Lock is kind of quietly brought in along too. How much did you look to get a quarterback in this free agency, and how did the Drew Lock process go as well?
Yeah, well, Tyrod was here last year and he played well for us. He ended up getting a really good deal from the Jets to be a backup. So we pivoted, and Drew Lock was a guy that we liked, and he's still young. He's athletic. He's got a good arm. He came in the game, had to play against us last year when we played Seattle and played well, and he played well against Philly. I think he has upside. And again, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for Dayball and Kafka and Shea Tierney and their ability to work with quarterbacks and develop quarterbacks if they had the physical tools and they're wired the right way. So he had a really good spring for us, and he had to take a lot of reps with Daniel not taking team reps in the spring, and did a good job and picked things up quickly.
I have two more questions and we'll wrap. First, has it been a surprise, the reception of Hard Knocks? Because I feel like it's been the most buzzed about Hard Knocks in years. Or is this, when you came into this thing, did you like kind of put the helmet on and say, you know what, there's going to be a lot of reaction. I'm just kind of going to take it and we're going to roll with it and we're going to embrace it like we do?
Yeah, there's obviously reservation because these are private conversations you're having or strategy, and it can all come back in your face. Something doesn't happen week 7 and it's
Totally.
They pull something from the show and this is what they said.
doubt.
Or it's all gambles. They're all bets. You're betting that this plan is gonna play out, and you got to have a lot of luck as well that you're gonna stay healthy and the ball's gonna bounce your way. So yeah, we put ourselves out there. I'm proud of the staff that we have put together, and there's a lot of talented people in that building, and I think that was on display in the first 2 episodes, and will continue to be, whether it's the college staff, the pro staff, Kevin and Ed and football administration, my leadership team, Brandon Brown, Tim McDonald, Dennis Hickey, Chris Rossetti, those guys are great. So yeah, there's definitely some uncomfortable conversations that are out there that you typically wouldn't want out there for everybody to see. But, we did it, and NFL Films has been amazing. And to me, the conversations that they were part of, whether it was camera, mics, whatever, and nothing got out, none of our information got out, none of our strategy.
Yeah, you don't think about that, like that, hey, that's really happening in March. And if that gets out in March, if even someone at NFL Films tells their friend who tells another friend who goes on a Reddit page, like that could screw a lot of things up.
Yeah, and they were amazing. I know you had Ken Rogers on there and Paul Camarada and Emily Neitner. They've done a phenomenal job, and they were great to work with, great partners, and the amount of trust that we put in them and they put in us. And it's just been a great partnership with NFL Films, and they did a great job. And, again, I'll be curious to see if next off season, if somebody's willing to do this all season show again, or what that turns out to be.
Last one. Has there been a big endorsement deal from a peanut butter and jelly company? I feel like that's a big piece of, and that's a nice marketplace that hasn't really been captured by football yet.
No, my phone hasn't rang. Maybe it's because I'm out of the country, but it hasn't rang yet. Maybe when I get back, Jiffy or somebody like that.
This is the Smucker's company. We're very happy with your work. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Dude, thank you for joining us. It's been so great, because you and I have known each other, but it's so great seeing you kind of on display, and just what a genuine good guy you are, and what a talented player evaluator and front office executive that you are. And the world is seeing it now.
No, I appreciate that, Peter. That's kind of you to say that.
All right, Joe Schoen, GM of the New York Giants and Hard Knocks superstar. Thank you for joining us on the pod.
Thanks, Peter.
Awesome hearing from Joe Schoen. It'd be smart to probably say Joe Schoen is the MVP of the episode. We got so much from both doing his job and then back at the house. But I like to go a little bit off the radar when it comes to the MVP. And in this case, I didn't even realize it while it was all going on. I think the MVP of this episode were the New York Jets, who in 2 different situations were the teams that were negotiating against the New York Giants. The John Runyon deal, I didn't realize the Jets were so hot on Runyon. And then we get the Tyrod Taylor situation, where the Jets end up getting Tyrod Taylor to sign with them as opposed to staying with the New York Giants. We even have the Giants brass, Shane and Dable, talking about like what they could provide to Tyrod Taylor that the Jets, they nail Tyrod Taylor, they land him, they bring him in. The Jets, though? The Jets, they're in this poker game, and the Jets win a few hands. I'll be curious to see how the careers of John Runyon Jr. and Tyrod Taylor go from here, because both the Jets and the Giants, two teams that share a building, were obviously very much competitive when it came to free agency this past offseason. That's something I didn't even know. That's it for this week of the Hard Knocks podcast. Next week, we'll get to go inside the Giants' war room for draft night. Make sure to check out the Hard Knocks Instagram page at Hard Knocks HBO for exclusive behind-the-scenes clips of the show. Don't forget that you can get even more behind-the-scenes Hard Knocks content at NFL.com. Also, you can hit me up on X at PSCHRAGS, that's P Schrags. Or you can find me on Instagram at P Schrager, PSCHRAGER. Feel free to leave comments where you get your podcast. I appreciate those of you who have reached out. We've had a few. It seems like you're all enjoying the season, but we also want to know what we can do to make this better and hear what else you want. We could take the heat. We'll be back next week for the penultimate episode featuring the Giants. You can check out episode 4 of Hard Knocks next Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern on HBO and streaming on Max. Talk to you all soon. Hard Knocks Podcast is a production of HBO and NFL Films in partnership with Pod People. It is hosted by me, Peter Schrager, and produced by Buffy Gorilla, Tony Mantilla, Brian Rivers, Sam Gubauer, and Carter Wogan. Special thanks to Michael Gluckstad and Savon Slater from the HBO podcast team, and of course, Ken Rogers at NFL Films. Thanks for listening, everybody.
That was a stressful day. You know, things takes time. You need to have parameters so you're not shopping hungry. You don't get desperate.